Hey, well, Deb Amos is joining me now. She's a veteran journalist, an award-winning reporter, worked as an international correspondent and journalist for NPR, is a professor at Princeton University, and an author. And Deb, I think the last time we saw each other in person was in Syria, I believe, just a few
Wow.
months after the beginning of the revolution in 2012, when we were both interviewing the spokesperson for Bashar al-Assad, Buthaina Shaban. Um, can you believe where we are today in
I know,
2020?
and I wouldn't have imagined it in those early days of the uprising. And it went on for more than a decade, so it was easy to not believe it would ever end.
Mhm.
And so it was a surprise to everybody when it did, and the way that it did. It was quite remarkable what happened.
And how did it happen? Because there are so many theories about where Ahmed al-Sharaa came from, who was supporting him, who is really kind of politically benefiting from the fall of the Assad regime and this new government. Can you
I think there
kind of
was
shed a
plenty
light
of
on
hands
that?
in it. There was plenty of hands in it. Certainly, the Turks knew everything that he was doing. The Brits knew everything that he was doing, and was helping along the way. But the thing that always strikes me, there's a very interesting book about him, and it's something like, moderated by the people. And he asked these two academics to come in 2017 because he knew that he was going to turn toward the West and he wanted
Right.
them to document it. And so Patrick Heaney, and excuse me that I can't remember the second author because I interviewed Patrick about it when I
Mhm.
wrote a profile of Shara. They hung around for all these years to watch how he was, if you protested, if you told him what he was doing wrong, you could change him. And that has stuck in my mind as I watch him now in power. That ability to take criticism and not always change course, but he will change course. He
Mhm.
is moderated by the people. He does listen to complaints. And I don't know about you, but I found let me tell you a story. So I went to a protest, and the protest was about this guy named Hansho. And
Right.
Hansho was an Assad oligarch who always went into towns after the army took it back. And, like he was the junk man. He'd come and take all the rebar and all the water heaters and the bathtubs and the exercise bikes, and he
Mhm.
would just take them. And
Accused of being a war profiteer, basically.
he was. There's no doubt about it. So much so that the government made a deal with him
Mhm.
that if he would give them $800 million, and he had spare change to live on after
Mhm.
800 million, they would not consider putting him in jail. And so there was a protest about that. And I was there and decided I would go. It's about, I don't know, 250 people. And they did something really quite funny. They, out in front of a government ministry, they brought a ratty old couch and a water heater and a rug, and these were gifts to Mr. Henshaw because this is the stuff he liked. Anyway, I'm watching all of this. I have a microphone in one hand and my phone up in the other, recording what was happening. And this woman spins around. She sees me, very nicely dressed, expensive blonde hair, and she says to me, she said, we love al-Sharaa. He is so handsome, but sometimes he does wrong things and we must tell him. And I thought, what country is this?
I have to say I share your I don't know I share this sense of being kind of in a surreal
Yes.
fever dream because the same thing happened to me when I was in Aleppo a few weeks ago and this uh, shopkeeper who was manning a tiny stall in the market said, we're really annoyed because the government stopped all the reconstruction efforts that had started under Assad just because it was people close to Assad who were paying for the reconstruction. And though we hated Assad, that doesn't mean we have to live, with the destruction of the war either. And I thought this would have gotten you thrown in jail.
Yes.
Uh, Yesterday if you had said that under Assad. That said, it is not smooth sailing. There are many, many issues. Where
Correct.
is Syria today, in your view, kind of 18 months after the fall of Assad, with this former, Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham fighter as president of Syria?
A couple of things about that. I mean, let us remember that he grew up in a, well-to-do neighborhood, same neighborhood that Bashar al-Assad lived in. His
Hmm.
father was a economist, worked in the Saudi, oil sector, wrote a book about democracy. His brothers aren't particularly religious. He's the only one.
Hmm.
His best friend in high school was an Alawite that he stayed friends with all the way through everything that happened, and came to visit him before he made his trek to Damascus. And as was reported in The Economist, made a deal. He said, apparently, he said to al-Sharaa, "It's hollow, it's over, it's done, there's nothing left." And he said, "Look, if you can talk to the Alawite commanders, because we're going to go to Damascus, and tell them if they get out of our way, we won't kill them, um, that would be good." And he did. And I remember having an interview with a guy who was on that march. And he said to me, it made me cry when I looked over and saw all of these military guys going the other way as we were going into Damascus. So
Hmm.
he kept that pledge that he
Right.
didn't shoot them if they got out of the way. So those are all things in his favor. I think what's not in his favor is the way that they've been dealing with the economy, which is their Achilles heel. Um,
Absolutely.
they have decided that they're going to do a free market economy. There's not going to be any government subsidies, not that they have any money to pay for it, they don't.
Yeah.
But it's just killing people about how much electricity costs. The even the bread for poor people has gotten smaller, not cheaper, but smaller.
Hmm.
And when there's protests, it's about two things. It's about the economy and it's about accountability. And they were able to deliver on accountability by speeding up the trials, the first
Yeah.
trial for an Assad guy in 2026, which they told me they were going to do when I
Yeah.
was there in January. And they did it because they can't fix the economy yet. They just seem to
I
be incapable.
I want to get to the economy and to the trials in just a moment, but first, you mentioned two big issues, but I think there's a third one, and that is Shara in control of his men? When you look at what happened in Sweden, when you look at what happened in Latakia, Sweden, for example, after those Bedouin Druze clashes led to some really horrific massacres that were committed by fighters sympathetic, at least, to the new leaders. And that really was, I think there was a before and after Sweden in terms of how maybe
Agree,
optimistic people were
agree.
about cross-sectarian entente in Syria. What is your view on that?
So, I mean, part of the problem was he couldn't pay his guys. He didn't have enough money. And so
Hmm.
what they were is a collection of militias, and they were taking their orders from their militia head guy who they've been doing all through the revolution. So no, he had no control over them.
Yeah,
It's
that
getting
that's a little
better.
concerning. Yeah,
It's very concerning. So by the
yeah,
time they got to what happened in Aleppo, when they decided that they were going to go into two Kurdish neighborhoods and say, you know what, we cannot have a Kurdish party being in control of two neighborhoods. And every time that there was an agreement over a ceasefire, it wasn't the SDF that was in control. It was the PKK. That was the
right.
shocker for me when I was in Damascus. The
Hmm.
PKK is in control of this. Well, it turned out they were, and
Yeah,
they didn't want a ceasefire. And there would be sniping from those two neighborhoods on the highways, and they killed more than 60 drivers. They just shot them. And that would, of course, halt the ceasefire talks. And what I watched is, I thought, you know what, you guys cannot afford three strikes, you're out. So if you don't get this one right, you're done.
yeah.
They they put everything on television. They let everybody live stream it. They brought in the white helmets to organize the evacuation of civilians out of those two neighborhoods. And I think they only lost a couple of people. While that is a terrible thing, it could have been a complete nightmare massacre, and we would have seen what happened in the coast and what happened in Sweden. This was different.
Yeah.
And
So
you
you're
saw
saying, so you're saying they learned from their what
it
happened
appeared
in
it
Sweden?
appeared to be so. And the
Hmm.
second thing that I learned when I was there in when they went further east, now it's Hasake, now it's the big, Kurdish area. And it's an interesting mix in that part of the country, because what you've got is an Arab population and a Kurdish population mixed internally for their military units.
Hmm.
They sent members of the cabinet who are from there to talk to the Arabs, Sunni Arabs, and said, hey, your old choice used to be Assad or the Kurds. Now it's a different choice. It's us or the Kurds. What do
Right.
you think? And I remember that the front collapsed because all those Arabs walked away from being in alliance with the Kurds. And
Well,
that's why it went so
which, no, and which makes sense because these are majority Arab villages and areas in many cases, and it would make sense that with Sharaa in power, they don't have the common enemy in Assad. But still, there is concern, and I heard from Christians in Syria and
sure,
other minorities in
absolutely.
Syria. They are, and I can understand why they're afraid. They are terrified that this is going to turn in slowly but surely into a Sunni Islamist regime that will, in some way or other or another, um, uh, exercise power that will harm them or that will certainly create an existential threat to their lives in Syria. And you mentioned the economy because I completely agree with you, Deb, that the most important thing is the economy.
Absolutely.
The reason, and I've been really doing a lot of research, I interviewed the former central bank governor of Syria. I've been trying to interview the minister of finance, who's been promising me an interview for the last several weeks, but somehow that hasn't happened. And I think I know the reason that the ministers are hesitating right now, because there are only very difficult questions you can ask them, and
Sure.
not that many positive updates they can provide. Um, the lifting of the state sponsor of terrorism designation was a big moment for Syria because it meant that foreign banks could
Yes.
establish official relationships with Syrian banks. But what that did was it meant that foreign international banks were looking at Syrian banks not as prohibitive anymore, but as high risk. So, regardless of whether or not that designation was still in place, the risk factor associated with dealing with a banking system that has been absolutely dead for decades without the compliance architecture, without any of that stuff,
The
means that
technology.
they're still miles away from getting this going, this economy. And you need a banking system, and they don't have one yet.
And they don't have one. So sometimes I think, and look, I'm not a Syrian, and so I might have a different way of looking at it. And that
Mm-hmm.
is who who on this earth could manage the challenges that this government has to create from whole cloth
Yes.
a new bureaucracy, new rules, new economics. I mean, it is mammoth. Now, this week I was talking to a very senior Syrian journalist who I won't name because I didn't ask if I could go on the record with what he said. And he said his sense was that the Sunnis of Damascus have turned against al-Sharaa, and they are being quite vocal about it. And it's because of
Mm-hmm.
the economy, because he can't get the engine started. And I said, turned against him to overthrow him, or turned against him to make him change? In the way that I was talking about in the beginning about a book, moderated by the people.
Yeah.
Do they get that if they yell, that maybe they can get his attention? And he thought for a long time and he said, still, to moderate him, not to overthrow him, because I think that they are aware that there isn't anybody else, that
And
the
yeah.
alternative is simply not there. And certainly in the beginning, when he was to speak to the UN for the first time, I was talking to sort of regional government people, and they said, look, you know, what we see is we're going to support him because there isn't anybody else. And so we wish him well. We see what the difficulties are, but we don't see an alternative. So, some of us don't really like that a former jihadi is running an Arab state on our border. But we think that the best thing we can do at this moment is to support him and hope to God that he can pull this off.
Yeah, and also if you overthrow him, imagine the chaos. And then what are you looking at? More clashes, more instability, the last thing Syria needs right now. And I think the last time I was in Syria again a few weeks ago, I really got the sense that there was still a lot of goodwill extended toward him, even though there is some concern. What I also was told by many people who are dealing with the new authorities is that they are, and this is an answer to your question, how do you rehabilitate and put an economy back together from scratch? But I think there is some concern that the Sharaa leadership and the government, they are not appointing experts and technocrats. They are appointing
I know.
allies and close circle, sort of people from Idlib they fought with or knew
Yeah. And this is not
their
Idlib. This
years.
is the whole country. Yeah, exactly.
That's
Exactly.
that, and that's a problem because you need to be able to take advice and expert advice and know-how from people who know how to run a ministry, who know how to run a central
Correct.
bank, who know that a central bank needs to be independent from the executive. For example, the municipalities and the governorships. I mean, just pick up the trash and fix potholes and do all these things. None of that is happening right now, and people are getting a little bit impatient. That's something
I
I
have heard
noticed.
that. Let's go back to my source who is from Idlib, so he knows all these guys. He says they call me sometimes because they need outside advice. And I say, you guys are tone deaf on this economy stuff. And if you don't start paying attention, you are
Yeah,
going to be in real trouble more than you are now. You know, I the deadline is coming and the dissatisfaction is growing, and you can't just put on trials and think that that's going to be enough. It's not.
yeah,
That if your energy bill is more than your monthly salary, how are you supposed to feed your kids? And that has been happening to people.
yes,
When they got money to pay three ministries, they were giving the younger ones, like $400 a month, but the old timers were still to their $150 salary. It made no sense. It was just a bad decision by somebody, and it didn't fix anything.
yeah,
So I don't know why they can't. Here's the thing: Syria, unlike what happened in Iraq, had 10 years of all these smart Syrians who left the country,
yeah,
got their PhDs, learned how to do stuff in Turkey and organizations in Germany, in Sweden. A lot of them came back and wanted to help build the country.
yeah.
You and I have both met so many of them who are dedicated, but they don't have a way in to give their, except in small cases. Almost every commission has got some of those people who are involved, and those are the movers and shakers on those commissions, but they're not running them. They're not.
But
And
even in
so I
small,
don't know why.
sorry to jump
But
in, even in small cases. I mean, there was a fast food restaurant owner who'd come from the back from the Gulf to open a tiny little fast food restaurant in Syria, and he told me the municipality, the authorities, the local authorities weren't even opening his application to open a business to give him a business license. They should be handing those out
yes,
without
exactly.
right
They should be giving them out.
any hesitation or any delay. So yeah, so
They should
that's something
applaud
I've
him as he comes in and applaud him as he goes out. I know. And I
precisely.
don't really understand it. He said, I don't either, why they're so paralyzed about this. Maybe it's a leadership problem. Maybe it is that, Shara is feeling insecure about his place there and is only trusting insiders.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say, but you can see it. You can
Yes.
see it outside.
And let's talk about the trials because you've been covering these trials of former Assad regime members. And you mentioned accountability as being really one of the most important issues for Syrians. where does that stand? What laws are they using? Are these trials running smoothly? Can you talk a little bit more about those?
So it seemed to me that they rushed that first one, that they were feeling under enormous pressure. They could either give something on the economy or on accountability, and they had to choose accountability because they couldn't give anything on the economy.
Yeah,
So the Atif Najib case opened, and that they are short of staff, of judges, of trained prosecutors. They
hmm,
fired most of the Assad era judges because they didn't think that they could handle what they wanted, which was an international standard trial with evidence and the ability for the defendant to be able to see the evidence, to be able to make their own case in court. Um, the first day was chaos.
yeah,
Not a terrible thing, but they corrected it in the second one. But here's what I was hearing. So we were not allowed in the courtroom. They really restricted access because of what happened in the first day when all the families were there
yeah,
and they were shouting and they had pictures of their loved ones and the defendant was sitting there through all of that. It didn't look like a fair trial to anybody.
yeah,
The second one, it was lawyers and human rights people and two media outlets, a German one and a Wire. However, it was very interesting to stand out in the court space where everybody stood through the whole time of the trial. And one of the high points for me, if as you remember, 2011, how it all begins is there are some teenage boys who are writing graffiti on the walls in Dara, and how the story goes that they wrote, "Your next doctor."
yeah.
They were arrested, they were tortured, their fingernails were pulled out. And when their parents went to ask Atef Najib, "Where are our children?" he said, "They are gone. Make some more. And if you can't, I will send men to your house to help them." That is the story that everybody knows about Dara. So the first thing that happens is, and this was like meeting a rock star, I meet one of the graffiti kids.
Oh, so
He's
did
now,
I. A young
yeah,
man from Dara. Yes.
yeah, he's now 31 years old. He has
Yes.
children of his own.
I
And
can't
I
remember
said,
his name, though. I interviewed him right after the fall of the regime. I can't remember his name.
Muawiyah, Muawiyah
Yeah.
Sanesni. And because how can you forget Muawiyah as a first name?
Yeah.
So I
I,
say to him, did they pull your fingernails out? And he said, no. I said, huh. He said, oh, they did terrible things to us, but they didn't do that. I said, that's interesting. And where were you tortured? He said, oh, Damascus. It was Air Force intelligence that
yeah.
came to Dara and arrested us and took us to Damascus for 45 days, and that's where they tortured us. And so I started asking around, and people said, yeah, here's the problem with this. They're gonna have a hard time proving the story that everybody has settled in their head. A.
Mhm.
B. That trial is under the 1949 Syrian domestic law that doesn't have um, chain of command as a crime.
Right.
And so what they have to do is they have to seat a parliament, which they've finally done, finally done. And they have to pass that law. But can they now retrospectively go back and apply it to the Najib trial? I think they can't. I
Well,
think maybe you
I
can,
mean,
but I don't know.
even if they don't have a chain of command crime, I presume, not having been in that courtroom or not having followed the trial as closely as you did, but there is so much testimony and witness testimony against him and what he did and what he told the parents and we'll see, I guess. But where does that
There's
trial
not that
stand?
much testimony about what he told the parents. There's not. That's
And
going to be a
where
problem.
does it stand now, the trial?
I don't know because he's not been on the stand for a while because
Yeah.
now they're doing Hassoun. Now they're doing the former Mufti of Damascus to try
Yes.
him. And I
And there's
was
also
told this week,
Amjad Youssef, Wasim al-Assad, another cousin, all
yep.
sorts of people lined up.
And I thought they were going to prioritize Amjad Youssef because everybody saw the video that The Guardian
Yeah,
ran in 2021 of him running people into a great big pit and shooting them and
yeah,
beheading one and yelling at another, "You bastard, why won't you die?" and shooting him again. That video is out there. I thought, and I was sure that they were going to prioritize that case. But I was told the reason they didn't and went with Hassoun is they didn't want to do two Alawites in a row.
I see.
And
I
Hassoun
mean,
is
so
a
at
Sunni.
least there's an effort there to at least try not to appear sectarian, and two Alawites
Correct.
in a row would appear as though it's some sort of
Correct.
revenge,
And as soon
against
as
the
I heard it, I
Alawite
went,
minority.
of
It
course, that's
makes
what they were
it
going
would make it would make sense,
to. It makes sense.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Let me tell you a story like that.
yeah.
And so I don't know what to think of it. So I'm in the Sham Palace Hotel,
Hmm.
and there's a guy sitting on the couch, and eventually he strikes up a conversation. Well, it turns out that his story goes like this. When he was 19, he lived in Aleppo. He put some anti-Assad graffiti on a wall. He was arrested. He was taken to Sednaya at 19. And his cellmate was a German Muslim who worked with Al Qaeda and knew the guys in the cell in Hamburg who were
Right.
part of 9/11.
Oh.
He was a
Mhm.
19-year-old kid and he was, starstruck with this guy. He was a great big guy. Eventually, went back to Germany, traded there. So he completes his term. He comes out of jail. He's a bit radicalized by that guy. And he gets out in about 2011 because they're trying to make room for the new protesters. And he joins Nusra when he gets out. He eventually becomes al-Shara's bodyguard. And about 2014, they have some sort of dispute, and he goes to the Netherlands and he goes to college. He gets a degree. He learns English. He learns Dutch. He becomes a barista at Starbucks and finally a trainer of baristas until two Syrians turned him into the police and said, "That guy's Nusra. He's a terrorist. You ought to arrest him," which they do. And he is the biggest terrorist in all of the Netherlands. He's in all the newspapers. He showed me all the clippings. And they were going to give him 21 years, but his college professor comes and says, "No, no, no, he didn't kill anybody. He didn't do anything. He just joined Nusra. That's all he did." And this is a nice guy. So they give him 6 years, where the head of intelligence comes every day to his cell and asks him questions about al-Sharaa. That's all they want to know. Al-Sharaa, al-Sharaa, al-Sharaa. So at about the time he's released, he goes back to Damascus and he gets a job in the Ministry of Tourism when I meet him. And that's what he's doing. And he is doing contracts for hotels who want, because he's smart enough and he speaks English and he went
And
to
and he
college
makes a
and
good cappuccino, presumably.
yes, exactly, he makes a good cappuccino and he's living at the Sham Hotel, Sham Palace.
But I
And
guess the question I have is just because you're telling this story, and we hear so much about these former jihadis who are now
yeah, no,
holding very important jobs. Are they ideologically still where they were 10 years ago? I mean,
not
or
this guy.
not?
Not, I can assure you, not this guy.
Because
We had so many.
that's one of the big questions. Because is this chargé d'affaires? In that interview I saw, there's a chargé d'affaires who was a Nusra fighter who's now a chargé d'affaires in the US. We're going to impose Sharia law and on all Syrians and all this rhetoric that terrifies Europeans and Westerners. We know that. And then he's the ambassador to the US, or this guy who's now working in the tourism ministry, or others who are now ministers and high level politicians in Syria. Do they still want to do this, impose Sharia
I saw
law?
this.
And
I saw this guy in the street in a shirt and tie, in a suit and tie. I saw him in a tie. I'm not kidding you. And he, and another guy I met that took me to Sednaya, who had a beard this long now still.
Hmm.
And, he could have gone to the government. He didn't. He wants to stay outside to criticize them. They both were the people who wanted to say a fond farewell to me before I left Damascus.
Hmm.
My two favorite jihadis. Are they still? I don't, it doesn't seem so. I spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
And they were just nice guys trying to get along in life, and it had been a crappy, 15 years for both of them.
Yeah, but I guess my final
And it
question would be okay, so let's say that they've evolved ideologically and that they see Syria as this multicultural, diverse country that they want to help rebuild. Do they want a democracy? Because we don't hear Shara ever use that word.
No, he doesn't. And that I cannot tell you. We didn't not have that discussion. Um, and it's hard for me to know. Do they want a decent life? Do they don't want to bother anybody? They don't want to impose anything.
Hmm.
Um, they just want to have a stable country. And the democracy part, I think, is not of their concern. I mean, look, this is happening in Iraq. Money has changed everybody. The most radical of the militias are busy making money now.
Yeah.
And are they still radical? I don't know. Did they really change in their heart? It's hard to know, but does it matter?
I mean, I think unless it causes sectarian bloodshed, unless minority communities feel under threat, unless all
Yeah,
of these things happen, then I suppose no, it doesn't. And this is back to our conversation about the economy. That is my biggest concern, only because that is the starting point to
it
everything
should be.
else. It's the
Yes,
starting point
correct.
to everything else. Then I think that's what I'm hearing from Syrians too. Let's get that done, right? Let's get that started at least. And then
Yes.
we can start worrying about that other stuff, because the other stuff just almost starts feeling like a luxury. Like, are you getting, that that parliamentary election you always wanted, or your representative that is exactly the
Sure.
politician that you want to see representing you in Damascus, etc. But I'm not seeing that happen, and that's my biggest concern.
That's the biggest concern. And you are absolutely right. The economy, it's the economy stupid, as they used to
Yeah.
say, in the US. And there it is certainly true. The lifting of the 1979 state sponsor of terrorism is a very big deal. And
Yeah.
now they can't blame anything else.
Well, they
That's the
need to
other thing.
build their own banking system, and for that they need experts and technocrats, and they need to accept advice, and they need to get people from the outside, because I don't think that 15 years in Idlib is going to give you the
No,
knowledge that you need to. And there's so many bright Syrians who've worked in the financial sector,
absolutely.
and I
Absolutely.
hope that they come back and help, and that their
They
help is
did.
accepted. Yeah.
They did on transitional justice. They let the UN in, they let the International Commission on Missing Persons in because they need them, because
Mhm.
Syria has no DNA kits because they were under sanction under
Yeah.
Bashar. And they got 66 mass graves and they don't know who's in them. And until they get those DNA kits, they're not going to know. And that
Yeah.
really holds up the trials, because you have to have a victim and you
Of
need to
course.
know the victim's name. So it is absolutely crucial that they get those DNA kits so that they can figure that out. And that international help they accepted. I know that the World Bank has been there, because my translator, I lost him for a couple of days because he had to go translate all their workshops. So I know that they're there. Whether they're listening to those people or not is another question. Here's my question, Hala. How much time do they have?
I don't know. I think they still have a bit of time. I think it's in years, not months, but before people really start becoming impatient. That's the sense I got. I still get the sense that people are so relieved that
Yes,
Assad is gone,
yes,
that they're willing to forgive, the slow pace, and maybe even understand that it takes a little bit longer than a few months to rebuild a country from scratch. So we'll see. They've
yes.
suffered a lot, the Syrians, and they deserve to live in peace and
I,
stability.
it is such a traumatized nation, and you feel it there. with every conversation you have when you just
Mhm.
listen to what happened to people, and how many people they lost. I mean, Gaza is terrible, but in some ways, it's like two or three Gazas, that happened over more
Yeah.
than a decade,
Yeah.
and 170,000 missing. It's the biggest one in the world in this century. It's really stunning when you think about
It really
how
is.
what that means for the society and how much work has to be done. This is like Srebrenica. This is like what happened in Argentina, and how many years did it take for them to be able to identify all the dead in Srebrenica?
Decades.
It
Decades.
it did, and that's what it's going to take here. And you just hope that people have the patience to wait.
Mhm. Thanks so much, Deb.